Welcome to this webinar. Glad to have you with us today as we talk about strategic agility. After about 25 years in industry, I decided to move to academics about 15 years ago and have enjoyed that quite a bit. My primary business interest is in helping firms create value. I teach this approach of creating value through the discipline of business strategy. And that's the lens through which I'm going to try to talk about strategic agility today. Those of you that know me from the classroom know that I am really not a PowerPoint guy. In fact, I'm known as the guy that's not the PowerPoint guy. I'm accustomed to being somewhere where I can have very large whiteboards and can do that. So we're not going to have PowerPoint today either. I just hope you'll be able to follow along and take some notes as you need to. As we get started today, I think there are three basic ideas that I'd like to get on the table, and we're going to expand these throughout the webinar. The first is that my premise is that COVID only magnifies a reality that all firms must face. And that is the reality that their markets change constantly. Because of the intensity of COVID, these changes are clearly obvious and they really can't be ignored. But markets are always changing. The changes are obvious to us if we're looking for them, and we would do well not to ignore them. So my thesis today is that COVID shows intensely that what we should be doing strategically all the time. One other idea that I need to make sure we understand is today I'm going to use the word market quite a bit. I'm going to use that word in a strategic sense. It's the combination of all the external elements that affect the firm's ability to be successful. I can't recall all the adjectives that I've heard to describe the last 6 months. Unprecedented, bizarre, surreal, uncertain, and I'm sure we could have a list much longer than that. And although all these adjectives are truly descriptive, quite honestly, I'm a bit tired of trying to describe our current reality. It just is our reality, and we have to face it in order to survive and then to lay the foundation to thrive on the other side of it. This COVID situation shows in dramatic fashion the need for organizations to have strategic agility. The purpose of organizational strategy is to create maximum value. I happen to believe that value should be measured both financially and societally, but it's to create create maximum value in a way that is sustainable. Those of you who know me know that I don't buy into, never have bought into the idea that good strategy is static. Good strategy has never been static. But certainly we can't approach our organization today the same way we did at the beginning of 2020. Nor is good strategy predicated on that foolish idea of trying to predict the future. It is predicated on our ability to respond to our current reality. So from a strategic perspective, what's happened over the last 6 months is that our market, that external idea, changed unexpectedly, it changed rapidly, and it changed dramatically. But as I've already said, in reality, markets are always changing. Therefore, our organizational strategy should always be responding. What's happened with COVID is the need for these changes have really just been broadcast and projected on a very large screen. This idea of understanding that markets are constantly changing and that good strategy calls for us to respond to those changes is at the very heart of the idea of strategic agility. We have always needed strategic agility so that a firm can create maximum value. The situation right now intensifies that need in order for us to even survive. So in this webinar, I want to do 4 things. Number 1, is I want to look in some detail at what I believe to be the three pillars on which a firm builds strategic agility. The second thing I want to do is to use some examples of how organizations have responded to the current situation with strategic agility. The organizational examples I'm going to use today are those that I'm familiar with. One is a small multi-location restaurant company. Another is a bank. And then the third is a church, because I think they can represent the nonprofit sector. These concepts apply to both profit-oriented and nonprofit organizations. So I wanted to make sure we had a representation of them as well. And although I have specific organizations in mind, I'm going to keep them anonymous. And I also think that the agility that we'll see in these examples can be applied to several organizations in these particular industries. The third thing I want to do is to wrap up with an idea about how we as organizational leaders can promote strategic agility in our firms. And then last, I intend to take questions. I'm going to try to allow 15, 20 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you may have. What I'd like for you to do is just post them in the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll collect all of those and then we'll deal with them toward the end. And I hope that you'll have some very good questions, because I am certain that through this presentation, I won't answer everything that you have in mind. So let's start with the three pillars on which a firm builds strategic agility. The first pillar is a clear organizational foundation. The second is a keen understanding of the market it serves. And then the third is a business system that connects the business's foundation to that market. So let's talk about organizational foundation for just a moment. The two key pieces of an organizational foundation are its purpose and its values. Purpose gets to the idea about why we exist. Why do we take up economic space? Why do we take up societal space? What would the world be like if we did not exist at all? That gets to the idea of purpose. Values are how we choose to behave, especially in our interactions with the market. With all of our emphasis on having strategic agility, I think these two pieces are critical because they do not change, or at least they rarely change. And that provides us anchors that allow us to have maximum agility in how we respond to market changes, because we understand why we exist and how we choose to behave. Without these foundations, without the foundation of purpose and values, we really don't have a lens through which to view possible market responses. In other words, we would, if we didn't know our purpose, if we didn't know why we existed, then any idea of the day may look appealing. Someone wakes up in the morning, very strongly advocates for a certain idea, and in doing that, they win the day, and we head off, and we don't even ask, does this really propel us forward in our purpose? Knowing why we exist, knowing our purpose, gives us permission to do things that we have not done before if the market needs it. Let me give you an example from the bank. One of the purposes of the bank that I have in mind is to serve the financial needs of small business with both products and advice. During this COVID situation, the PPP loans came along very rapidly. And this particular bank didn't have a great deal of experience. It certainly didn't have strong experience in government-backed small business lending. In this situation, that's exactly what the market needed for the bank to achieve its purpose. Its purpose was to help small business with both products and service. And the primary product and service that was available to small business was a government-backed loan program called PPP. So it went all out to get up to speed. And even though the program was changing constantly as it was rolling out, they still managed to get up to speed and very effectively serve their customers. Another example comes from the restaurant company that I mentioned. one of their core values, one of the ways that they want to behave toward their market is with hospitality. But when COVID shut all of the restaurants down, it brought a very stark question into mind. How does a restaurant company demonstrate hospitality when folks can't even enter their locations? What this company did is, first of all, they decided that they would not go straight to delivery until they found a way to do that with the requisite hospitality that their values called for. And then on top of that, when they were starting to think about pickup, they started thinking about how do we train our employees to have hospitable interactions with people who are simply doing pickup of food, not nearly as long an interaction as they would typically have had with their customers inside of their location. So the bank looked at its purpose and with strategic agility rolled out a new program. The restaurant company looked at its values and with strategic agility discovered how to apply that in a marketplace that had changed dramatically. So when you think about organizational foundations, the question I want to leave you with is, how well do you and your organization know why you exist and how you will behave in the market? Because that gives you the foundation upon which you can have strategic agility. The second pillar that you build upon which you build strategic agility is understanding the market. Now, I've already mentioned that in the strategic context, I use the term market a bit more broadly than it's often used. The market comprises all of the factors that affect the firm that are outside of its control. Certainly those factors include customers and potential customers. We cannot control whether they buy from us or not. But it also includes governmental and legal influences as well as competitors. And it's the combination of all of these external factors that comprise the situation in which our firm exists currently. And if we don't respond well to those factors, then our firm will at best be suboptimal, and it very well could fail. Now with COVID, we saw a dramatic change in several of these factors. Our customers had great uncertainty on both their health and their personal finances. Government enacted unprecedented shelter-in-place orders, and competitors were trying unusual approaches and aggressive pricing to attract the limited number of customers available. And although we can readily see the intense changes in the market brought on by COVID, the reality is that the market is always making these types of adjustments. Customers are always using their own perspective to decide whether to buy. Governments are adjusting various laws and regulations based on the current political environment. And competitors are always trying new approaches to get people to buy from them rather than to buy from you. In other words, the market is always changing, and your strategy needs to respond to those changes. Let me give you an example from the church I was talking about. One of the key activities, one of the key strategies at the church was to gather large groups of people for worship on Sunday. During this environment, the government mandates effectively prevented this from occurring. But in an agile approach, the church then moved to place its worship opportunities online so that people could engage in those activities remotely. The interesting thing, and I'm sure they would agree with this, is that their first approach to online was far from perfect. In strategic agility, we're not focused on getting it operationally perfect. What we're really focused on in strategic agility is in responding to the market and responding to market change and then adapting as we go. So as we think about the idea of understanding the market, the question I'd like to leave you with is, to what degree do you have processes in place to know when market elements change enough to adjust your strategy? With COVID, Those market changes slapped you in the face and you knew that you had to adjust. But in the normal operation of your business, how do you know? What is it that you have in place that allows you to understand these market changes and when you need to adjust your strategy? The third pillar on which you build strategic agility is your business system. You have a system that allows you to connect your purpose and values to the marketplace. I believe that any business, really any organization, are best viewed as systems. To function optimally in a system, all the components of that system must work well, but they also must connect well with each other. A real clear example is just from our human bodies, the cardiovascular system. There are two major elements to the cardiovascular system, and that's the heart and the lungs, and they're connected by various types of blood vessels. And believe it or not, there are over 60,000 miles of blood vessels in each of our bodies, over 60,000 miles. And all it would take for that system to be disrupted is either for the lungs or the heart, two big elements, two big components of that system, not to function well, or for a very small part of one of those vessels that connects the heart and the lungs, even less than an inch of that vessel that connects the heart and the lungs to become clogged, and then that system fails. Out of 60,000 miles, 1 inch of connectivity can cause the whole system to collapse. What I'd like to do for just a minute is to share a screen with you. And what I'd like, as I share that screen, it is a screen of a business systems model that I have, and I'll try to explain it to you. This model basically, just like the cardiovascular system, has two major components along with vessels. This particular model of the business system has 5 major components. The first one is the customer. Everything starts at the customer. We don't have a business without the customer. Everything that we have should start here. We need to understand our customer, and primarily what we need to understand about our customer is what they perceive to be benefit from what we offer compared to the price. A second major system are our capabilities. Capabilities are the knowledge and skills that we need to have to deliver whatever our offering is to the customer. In reality, having good physical resources or good human resources are really not enough. Resources don't deliver value to the customer. Capabilities deliver value to the customer. A third major component of a good business system is your capital. Do you have enough funding? Do you have enough capital base that allows you to have the energy and the velocity inside of the business that you need? The ability from capital, the ability to procure resources is what allows us to have capabilities. And we would have human resources, physical resources. They're coming from our capital resources that allows us then to have capabilities. And then from those capabilities, we're able to produce whatever the offering is that we offer to the market. And for us to have an effective business system, we need to have all 5 of those components functioning very well. But I've come to believe that that's really not enough. And in fact, it's at the connection points that we find the places where businesses most often perform suboptimally. And it's also at the connection points where we can demonstrate the most strategic agility. So the 4 connection points here is where capital connects to resources, and that's where we choose how to allocate our capital. Where do we place the limited capital that we have in order to create the most value, both financially and societally? Once we have those resources, then we have the need to look at resource relevance as it translates from resources into capabilities. So often we may have hired or secured resources, either human or physical resources, that were very good for the capabilities we needed 5 and 10 years ago. but are they still relevant for the capabilities that we need to go to the market today? And so one of the connection points that I think is very critical to us is resource relevance. A third connection point in which we can exercise strategic agility is the process and systems alignment. So we have these capabilities that should allow us to serve the market, but do we have our processes and systems such that allow us to serve that market with very little friction? Have we aligned those to the capabilities and the market needs? And then the final place where we have connectivity and where we need to look to exercise strategic agility is in product market fit. Are the things that we're trying to offer to the market what the market actually sees benefit in receiving, what customers see benefit in receiving? And so I think it's very important for us to look at product market fit as well. Let me go back through our companies and give you a couple of examples of these. And the idea of capital allocation, let me look at the restaurant company. Prior to COVID, this restaurant company was looking at several attractive expansion opportunities. They had actually developed the capital to procure new resources, new locations, new employees, those kinds of things. And so they had quite a bit of opportunity to expand. Yet as COVID hit and their business essentially fell by 80–90%, they recognized the need to conserve capital to support existing operations. Now, although this is a stark example, I think it does raise the question, how many times has your firm continued investing in resources because you've always done it, or because it has organizational momentum or organizational championship, even if the market doesn't value that resource in which you're investing? And that brings me to the idea of resource relevance. I see that I have a good example of resource relevance in the church, because that church that I'm thinking about had a significant amount of its capital invested in real estate, and it had very little capital invested in digital infrastructure. But because of COVID, overnight, the real estate became largely irrelevant, and having the capability to deliver services to its congregants could not be dependent upon real estate anymore. And so it had to procure digital resources in order to have this ability to deliver their services. So a resource that was very valuable, gave them great capabilities at one time, because of COVID, was not nearly the resource they needed. And so the question that I have about resource relevance that helps you get to strategic agility is, what resources do you have today that are no longer delivering the capabilities to meet the market's demands? If you think about process and systems alignment, I think about the bank. The bank had built its brand, its whole approach to doing business around personal interaction and fairly traditional banking products. And so its processes and systems were designed to support that approach to business, personal interaction and traditional banking products. But since both employees and customers could no longer meet in person, it had to rapidly change its process and systems to effectively serve customers whose money needs really didn't stop, even though there was a pandemic going on. I also saw that as I looked at how they handled the PPP program, which didn't really allow for the time for their traditional underwriting system and underwriting process. They had to do it much more rapidly. And so that does bring to my mind the question, what processes and systems today stand in the way of using your capabilities to produce what the market desires? And I'm really not as concerned about how we've adapted necessarily in the COVID environment, because as you remember, my premise is that COVID just magnifies, it intensifies what we should always be doing as we think about strategy. So do we have our processes and systems aligned so that we can produce what the market desires? And then the last connection point is the idea of product market fit. back to the restaurant. Its primary product had always been serving food to its customers inside of their facilities. At the extreme with COVID, if it had insisted on continuing to offer that product, it would have gone out of business because the product no longer fit the market in any shape, form, or fashion. It didn't fit the customer side of the market. It did not fit the government side of the market, nor did it really fit the competitor side of the market. And so they had to make a rapid transition in order to find new product market fit. And my question to you is, do you know your customer well enough to know what she really wants for you to deliver to her? Because I think that is very, very important as we try to get this system operating optimally. If you buy into my thesis that COVID only magnifies the strategic agility that we need inside of our organizations all the time, then I think it is natural to ask, how do I help our organizations to be more strategically agile? If you're on this call today, it's because you probably are in a situation, if not to drive strategic agility, at least to heavily influence it or to practice it inside of your areas of influence. And so the question we need to ask is, how can we help our organizations be more strategically agile? Not in a time of crisis, but in the normal operations of our business. I think there are three primary ways to do that. One is by having a great deal of clarity. We need to be very clear on our purpose and the values of our organization. And it will surprise you how many organizations really are not clear about why they exist or how they're going to behave. But the other point of clarity, I think, is we need to be very clear on how we see the market and the effects that that vision of the market has on driving our current strategy. We need to be, the people inside of our organization need to understand, we see the market like 1, 2, 3, maybe a bullet list of a dozen or so items. And all of our strategy today is based off of the way that we view the market. Once again, all those external factors that are out of our control. If we have that level of clarity, then our folks are going to know when the view of the market changes enough that it should cause us to make strategic adjustments. If they understand that this view of the market is driving this strategy, then as they understand that view of the market is changed, then they'll understand that perhaps the strategic responses to that market need to change as well. So one of the first ways that you can help drive strategic agility in your business is through clarity. I believe the second way is curiosity. Honestly, it's pretty easy to keep doing the things that we've always done. They're comfortable. We've probably done them this way for a long time, so people have a great deal of experience there. Perhaps they've worked pretty well for us. Sometimes it takes a crisis for us to become curious enough to ask whether what we've always done is what we ought to do going forward. As a leader inside of your organization, you really need to demonstrate this curiosity, and then you need to encourage or empower others to be equally as curious. One curious question that I think you could always employ is, what is the market telling us today that it was not telling us yesterday? Now, sometimes the answer to that question is nothing. The market is speaking to us today just as it spoke to us yesterday. Then other times, it is virtually shouting for you to adjust. The third element that will help us as leaders that we need to practice in order to have strategic agility is culture. The reality is that being strategically agile in a firm really shouldn't reside with just one person. It really can't reside with just one person unless it's a very small firm. And I happen to believe that it shouldn't even, strategic agility shouldn't even reside with just a small group of people. And especially in larger organizations, as strategies cascade through those firms, as business units begin to address sub-markets, other people inside of the company, other people inside of the organization have to focus on strategic agility as well. This type of organization-wide focus on strategic agility is really the function of organizational culture. It's not just one person or a small group of people. It is the culture. It's the organization with a collective voice saying, this is how we do things around here. This idea of being strategically agile, understanding and responding to our markets is how we do things around here. So to have this kind of culture, as the leader, I think you have to give permission, both explicitly and implicitly, for people to practice strategic agility. You need to encourage them to have a keen awareness of the market. You need to be on the lookout and encourage them to have a lookout for resource irrelevance. Empower them to bring to the organization's attention the places where old processes and systems no longer align with producing what the market wants. And the whole organization and people within the organization need to be empowered to engage with the customers at their various parts of the organization so that the firm understands deeply what the customer finds and considers to be beneficial. So if you want to help promote strategic agility inside of your organization, you need to have a great deal of clarity, both about why you exist, how you behave, and especially about how you see the market today. You need to have a great deal of curiosity so that you're always asking, is the market telling us something different? And you need to promote a culture that makes strategic agility a part of how we do things around here. By necessity, COVID has required that we become strategically agile. But in reality, the market has always required strategic agility from us as a firm. That kind of concludes my formal side of the presentation today. Davis, have we had any questions yet? If you have any questions, make sure that you put them in the Q&A.
Hey, hi, Professor. This is Jackie Gomez.
Hi.
So what's the balance between? I'm in a project right now, in a work stream, where we're trying to come up with a solution to upskill our employees to really see a little bit more diversity in senior management.
Okay.
Where we have talent, and specifically in tech. And I think we're in a research phase where we're trying to figure out a solution, figure out a program, figure out a process to really streamline promotions. But I'm wondering, like, what's the balance between being really clear on your vision and on what it is that you need, and still being kind of ambiguous and figuring that out? Because I'm struggling with, what are we doing again? What are we trying to accomplish? And being met with, we're still figuring it out, and I feel like I still need a grasp on it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. I will always err on the side of clarity. And part of clarity in this situation may be, we just don't know what it is that we're trying to figure out. You'll probably recall from one of my classes that I believe that strategy, not only is it not static, but it's also not linear. So there's an idea of iteration. Someone described it as a spiral. I think of it more as a circle, where we think this is what the market wants, whether it's greater diversity or talent. We think this is the best way to go about delivering that. But as we get into the market, we may not be able to, what we think is best may not be the right thing right now. So that's an agile approach of, let's start, and then we understand here's sort of the result we may want to get at the end, but we'll keep working till we find the approach that helps us get that particular result. That is pretty much an agile framework of doing that, very similar to what the church did when they started out going to digital type worship services. Not very good, but they continued to invest and they continued to see this worked and this didn't and tried to make those changes, all in the context of their overall purpose. So I think we have to get comfortable with a bit of ambiguity as we try to figure all of these things out. I see a question that Amy had about encouraging more people to be involved in the strategic conversation, and then also a related question from someone about how do we get leadership to allow those people to be involved. If leadership is actively resistant to involvement of broad people in strategic conversations, then that's pretty difficult for us to overcome. And it's going to be someone of influence with that leadership is going to have to help overcome that active resistance. What I have found in most organizations, at least those that have some degree of size, is that there are subunits in the organization, business units, projects, or whatever, that can also think about that subunit from a strategic perspective. And so the overall leadership of the organization may not want to have a lot of involvement at the broad organizational level in coming up with strategy, but it may at the lower levels of the organization, we can all take strategic approaches as well, and that gives us the opportunity to demonstrate good strategy and creating value through strategy that perhaps will have some influence on those of the overall organization. The other real quick point here is I do believe that broad organizational strategy is ultimately the responsibility of the senior leadership of that organization, because they're the ones that, at least in theory, conceptually, ought to have the broadest view of the organization, and therefore they ought to have the broadest view of strategy. But if it only stays at that upper level and never cascades through the organization, then you really don't have a strategic organization. You have a top-down strategy to response organization. So one of the things that I encourage people to do is to put in place the processes that allow this to cascade, allow strategy to cascade, and say, how do I take what is the organizational level strategy and make it relevant inside of my own part of that organization? And that whole model that we talked about, as well as a strategy creation model perhaps, is applicable at all levels of the organization. And so that's what I would do is, first of all, if you can find a senior leader champion to help kind of promote the idea of broad strategic participation. But secondly, don't get so frustrated at the upper level of management or leadership that they won't allow involvement. Don't get so frustrated with them that you don't practice good strategy at whatever level of the organization you find yourself. Davis, I see another question that came in. The question is, can you discuss ways to deal with reluctance to change within an organization when we face rapid change in the market? Perhaps also the hesitance to quickly move forward imperfectly rather than wait until the new systems and processes are tested and refined. You know, that is a tough. The answer to that question is tough, because basically you've described a culture. It's a culture that really either is not aware of market changes, it's just chosen not to be aware of market changes, or it's chosen to ignore those market changes. Because if you are in fact facing rapid market change, that market change is going to require that you make organizational changes to respond to it. Once again, back to the COVID deal, just simply being an intensifier or a magnifier of that kind of change, it required that organizations not do the same thing the fourth week of March as they did the fourth week of February. The market changed that dramatically. Well, other market changes cause that same kind of effect. And so one of the ways that you help deal with that reluctance is make sure that everybody is on the same page, seeing the change in the market. And once again, it may require you to make the response as a subunit of the organization, and then use that win, if you will, as an example of how you promote market responsiveness throughout the company. The second part of the question is this idea of moving along quickly, although imperfectly, as compared to testing and refining. Frankly, I grew up in business. That 25-year business career I had was primarily in the idea of testing and refining and bringing products and services to market that were pretty much well baked before they went to market. And so I can really appreciate this hesitance to move quickly and imperfectly. The problem is that what I've come to see over time is if what we're trying to do is to offer goods or services to a group of customers, there's really no amount of market research that will get that product market fit to that group of customers aligned 100% until you actually begin to engage with them. And so I think it really is a new approach to management. It's not an approach. It's not an approach that says we're not going to do market research, or that's not important, or we're not going to do testing and refining. It's an approach that says testing and refining will only get us so far, and at some point we have to go to the market, and the market is going to tell us how right we've gotten our point of view. Now, one of the things April, in connection with that, said that her company does a great job at pivoting based on the market. However, training and empowering our customers, our customer-facing roles like sales and customer success at the same rate is difficult. If something will change in 6 months, why take the time to learn it? And so how do you approach communicating rapid change? I think that going back to my idea of clarity, I think one of the ideas there is you've got to be clear as to why we're rapidly changing. We're rapidly changing because the market, those customers are rapidly changing. And so if you view yourself as a salesperson or a customer success person as someone who is there to serve our customers, the reason you want to learn something is so that you can serve them and also understand them better. And so I think the approach to communicating rapid change may be something as simple as allowing or is having some of your customers that are in their marketplaces dealing with rapid change talk to your customer-facing roles and say, you know, this may change in 6 months because my customers are changing in 6 months, but we've got to be doing it very well today. So I need you to learn something. I need you to learn the new system and the new product and all the pivoting that you've done so that we're very effective in 6 months so that we still have customers at some point in the future. And I think that's to me, that feels a little kind of squishy, but at the end of the day, if what our business system is about is delivering what a customer sees to be beneficial, and if that customer only sees it to be beneficial for 6 months, we still have to deliver it for that 6 months in a way that is beneficial. And if that customer's downstream market changes, then if we're a good partner with that customer, if we're really focusing on helping the customer be successful, then we're going to have to be responsive and change as well. Hope that answers that question. We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes. If there are any other questions, either live or on the Q&A on the Q&A function, or if one of my answers didn't really get to what the question was trying to get to, I'd be glad to try to clarify that, or even to answer it offline as well, or have a conversation with you offline. Any other questions? Well, if there aren't any others, I'm going to give you back about 12 minutes of your day that you didn't expect. I do want to thank you on behalf of the Lipscomb College of Business. You have honored us by taking time out of your day to listen to some of the content that we're providing. I will tell you, the Lipscomb College of Business and the Pfeffer Graduate School of Business, absolute fantastic place to be. And we thank you for your support of our organization and the things that we're trying to do. And I do hope, I really do, and well, I shouldn't say hope, I expect for all of us to begin to approach the market in a strategically agile way, because that really is what business success requires today. Thank you, and I hope you have a good week.